Hello guys. So we're gonna do a new kind of video today. Um, yeah, I was just thinking back a few days ago. I was like, you know what? I don't remember at all how I used to do blind back in the day. Like what algs I used to do, and I'm just curious, like how, just what it was like. So, and naturally this was years ago, so I don't remember anything. But I decided to pick um, my blind NAR from 2008 and try to reconstruct it and take a look at it. So yeah, this solve was a 59.66. It was the NAR at the time, third in the world, and yeah, it was the third sub one ever achieved in comp. So that's kind of cool. I remember being very happy about this one because back then sub one was a huge milestone. So yeah, um, yeah. I guess before watching the video, I'll go into a little background about what I used to do in terms of method and stuff. In 2007, I no, I think it was 2006. I learned blind, and I first learned 3OP, which I'm not gonna go into detail with, but I learned that off someone's web page, and I got pretty decent with that one until I moved on to using freestyle, which freestyle is kind of like freestyle. It's the same concept where like you memo the stickers, you solve two at a time, like with one alg. But the main difference was that I didn't have like optimal algs for each case or even close to. I kind of just did whatever I needed to solve two pieces. Like I would do a com if it was easy. I would set up to a U perm if that was not too hard. I'd set for corners. I'd set up to A perm, stuff like that. And sometimes if things were too difficult for stuff, I'd like resort to old Pachman just to solve a case. Like just anything I could think of to get on with the solve. Like that's pretty much what freestyle was. But and freestyle is essentially just that, but having a set case for every single alg. That's pretty much the difference. But another weird thing I used to do back then, when I first learned blind, the web page I learned off of didn't explain cycle breaks. It didn't explain what to do in a situation where your cycle ends, like picking a new piece and starting over. So I didn't know what to do. So I kind of was just like, all right, I guess I'm just supposed to pick another buffer. So essentially, that's what I did every solve. I would float. Essentially, it wasn't called floating back then, but I don't know when that phrase was coined, but pretty much I was floating from buffer to buffer to get through a solve, and a lot of times it was really inefficient because like I was forced to do it. It wasn't like I would do it in a case where it's beneficial. I would like literally feel like I was forced to do it. So I would get to like if I had a scramble with multiple two swaps and stuff like that, I would like set up to Z perms or H perms or like I don't know, like do two parity algs to solve each set of edges or something. Even on like corners, I would set up to an E perm or something. Like just stuff like that that was really bad. But because I used to do that, there were some on some scrambles, it actually worked out really well. So I was able to get some good fast singles like this one. Like this was an example of where it actually paid off, or or it seems like it did. This one was pretty easy, but yeah. So that's essentially how I used to solve back then. And on top of that, I also used to use visual memo because I was too lazy to learn a lettering scheme. At first, I didn't even know you were supposed to use a lettering scheme. When people started telling me that, I was like, oh well, I'm lazy and I'm already pretty decent, so I just stuck with it. But I'm glad I eventually came around and did blind the right way. But anyway, so I guess we'll get back to this. We'll get to the video now. Yeah, this was in 2008 in Toronto. It was a fun trip. I'm wearing pajamas right here. Yeah, back then I really didn't care. Uh, Wish I could go back in time and change some things. 24 memo. That's probably pretty average back then. All right, this alg coming up is the worst one. Oh, it's bad. Yeah, I'll show you what that one was when we get to the reconstruction. That one's also bad. I think people are gonna walk in front in a bit. Yeah, that was hard to figure out what that alg was. And boom, done. Yeah, it was pretty good. I was very happy with that solve. Yeah, it was. Man, I wish I was that thin again. All right, so I guess I'll get the scramble up on screen first. There's the scramble. So yeah, this wasn't the actual scramble I got, but I just generated one after I reconstructed it. Okay, so I'm assuming that I memoed edges first. Because I solved corners first, I'm assuming I just glanced at them real fast before I solved them because I was using visual. So I'm gonna assume I was memoing edges first. All right. So I know for a fact I used UF buffer back then as my primary. So I'm gonna start there. And because I'm using visual, I'm just gonna point out the pieces. So this one to this one, which goes up here, down here, and then the cycle ends here. So I'm assuming back then I broke it down like, okay, I have this alg, and then I have this sticker left over. And when I saw this sticker left over, I was probably thinking, okay, so I have this two swap here. So I'm either gonna solve that by setting up to parity with corners somewhere, or I'm gonna fix it with with another two swap of edges or something. So that's probably what my thought process was. And then I would switch to another piece to start tracing again. This one's used. This one's flipped, and because I don't know how to cycle break, I would only solve these by flipping them with other pieces. So I chose UB, and I was probably happy with this because I'm using visual memo, it's really easy to remember, okay, I have a U-perm here. So I probably was just like, okay, do a U-perm. So then after the U-perm's over, it goes down to here, and then up here. So, and then I know, okay, well, now I'm done tracing. So I have and I knew that UB would be flipped. So I was actually probably kind of relieved by that. I was probably relieved because I was probably like, okay, well, I knew this one was flipped. So these two, I need to be flipped. They're right next to each other. That's easy to remember. So I have those to flip, and these are going to be setting up for parity somewhere. So I was probably pretty decent back then, because sometimes edges could really be a mess with how I used to memo. So, all right. So next I'd probably go on to memoing corners. I was actually very shocked by this. So I didn't know what my primary buffer was back then for corners. I couldn't remember. I assumed it would be UBL because then I could like resort to old Pachman easier if a case was bad. But it turns out I used UFL as my primary buffer. And I know I used it for my primary buffer because all of them, there are no corners solved here. So I definitely went with my primary buffer. So that's cool. Yeah. So I memoed here, to here, to here, to here, to here, to here, down here. And I knew that this one would be left over. I was probably very happy about that because these are right here like that. Very easy to set up to parity because my buffer is here. So yeah, we'll get to that later. But so yeah. One thing you might notice, the reason why this is probably a good solve is because I only had to switch my buffer once in the edges to UB. So that's probably one of the reasons why the solve was pretty good. So yeah, I solved corners first. So the first thing I did was this piece to this piece. So to do that, I did an R2 setup to a com where I do an interchange here. Insert like that. And then I undid. Probably could have canceled and done an R, but I was probably being safe. And this one I was actually kind of surprised that I was able to see this, or maybe I just knew it already. But so out of here, the next one's here to here. I actually did an F setup because that actually sets up to an A perm. I mean, I would see it as this to back here. But as you can see, it's also like an A perm on top. So I was able to I'm surprised I was able to recognize A perms on like the side stickers. That's cool. So yeah, I did that and undid. So those two are solved and those two are solved. So this is where it gets ugly. This one I'm not happy with, but the next case was this back corner here to the bottom corner here. Now I think from the video it looks like I panicked a little here and didn't know what to do. It looks like I almost like resorted to doing old Pockman or something, or I did like an R2 to maybe like hope I could see something from an R2 point of view, but I just couldn't figure out a comm from this point. But I eventually realized I could set up to something really inefficient, but it would solve it. So I did R prime to put this up in the top with the buffer, and I did a D prime to put this down here. So, and then I rotate it over here, and so now I have the comm like this. And how I used to solve this was U2. And then rotate back. Oh, like that. So I guess I'll go over what that was. Yeah, I forgot I used to do this entirely. Nowadays I wouldn't do this at all, but I used to literally, so it would be like the U2 interchange here. And this series of moves to insert that one, U2, and it doesn't look like it, but it's actually a self-inverse. So that's what I used to do for that. Terrible. So very inefficient last corner solution. But yeah, then I knew I had this corner here. You can even see in the video that I'm like doing this, like trying to remind myself like that's there. So, all right. So next, moving on to edges. I was actually shocked to see that I didn't start in UF. I definitely memoed UF first. I know that for sure. But I executed UB first. So I kind of just rotated up here and did that U perm that we saw. So that's done. And then next we have UB down here to here. And I did a U2 setup here. Just makes sense because now these are interchangeable with an M2. But you would think that I would... This is too bright. Anyway, so you would think that I would insert like this and then do M2 and like invert for the comm, right? But no, I actually did M2 first to insert that into here. And then I did this like that. And then undid the U2 setup, which is just awful. And I think I know why I did that. You know, I wasn't the best at comms back then. And I think I felt most comfortable when I did the interchange first. I can't quite explain why, but that's just how it was. So if I did the interchange first, I would have to do the M2 first. And then that would leave me putting it in DB, which is just awful. But that's what I did. So yeah. And I knew at that point that UB would be in its position but flipped. And I remember that these two are left to do the flip alg. So I did U2, and I use this alg to flip these. And it's funny because I actually still use that alg. I mean to switch that. Well, I use it for like when these two are flipped, but you saw that I set up to it. So, all right. So now UB is all done. So now I move on to UF again. So I remembered this piece to this piece. So this alg I actually still use, but I executed better. Back then I did this. I rotate over here, insert like that, swap out, and then back. So, oh, yeah, what I do now is the same thing, but I do S moves. So, but yeah, back then I couldn't really do that. So yeah, so after that's done, this is at the point where someone walked in front of the camera. So pretty sure this is what I did. I'm pretty sure I did a D setup to solve this to this with like an RU U perm cancellation. I'm pretty sure I probably actually just did R2 and then the U perm. Maybe did the last move right, but and then back. So at this point I have parity, which is probably the part where I was like, okay, that's easy, because I remember it's just U prime L prime to T perm. LU. So yeah, that's it.